Mr. Jan Walsh, hello. Thank you for receiving us in the Metropolitan Republican Club in New York.
Thank you.
My first question to you is very simple. What is exactly the Metropolitan Republican Club and what is its mission?
So what we are is the oldest Republican club in New York City, and we're devoted to basically educating Republicans here in the city, getting them up on the facts and other issues that can make them informed voters. We also make sure that people who run for Congress, who run for state senate, who run for New York Assembly are helped by our organization. Many times they use this as their headquarters, and we help them with volunteers and other, providing them with other help.
This year, there's a lot of talk about Trump getting more and more popularity. How do you feel things are going in New York State and New York City? Do you think Trump might win the New York State? And do you see more Republicans, people who are going to vote for him this year in New York?
So in order for a Republican to win in New York, you have to have a trifecta. You have to win Long Island in its entirety. You have to win upstate New York, and you have to win Staten Island. And then you hold down the vote total to about 70%, I believe. So 70% of New York City, if you can keep the Democrats to 70%, then yes, you can turn the state red. And it's a major undertaking for Mr. Trump to do so. I don't believe the state has been won by the Republican Party since George Herbert Walker Bush in '88, but it can be done. The people here are, after the pandemic, after the lawlessness, after our streets being taken over by migrants, by lawlessness, by an ineffective government here in New York City, I believe it can be done.
The first time Mr. Trump ran for the presidency, that created a lot of divisions inside of the Republican Party. And it was pretty much the same in the 2020 election. This time, however, it seems that the whole Republican Party is behind him. What can you tell me about that?
I would say that the first time he ran in 2016, he was a shot to the system. You had many professional politicians from Washington who were running for president. They were all basically singing from the same choir and saying the same things. They weren't offering anything new, and they weren't really touching the Republican base and what they were interested in. He came along and he talked about the issues that the base was concerned about, not the DC establishment. It struck a nerve, and it powered him to win in 2016, our primary, in a very crowded field, defeating most notably Jeb Bush of the Bush dynasty. And in 2020, I would say that the party was more united behind him than not so. He was a sitting president. He had been basically gone through 4 very successful years. You had the onset of the COVID pandemic that really led to a lot of problems in this country with BLM, with the virus itself. And I would say that that really hurt both parties in their ability to go out to the people in the United States and canvass. But this time, yes, everyone is basically behind him. He did have a very strong challenge from Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador and governor of South Carolina. But I would say that once it was clear he was going to win, even she got behind him and released her delegates to support him. So we are ready. We're motivated. We want change in this country. The last 4 years of Joe Biden have been disastrous. And we're looking for a restoration of what he was able to bring to the country prior.
What does it mean to be a Republican in New York, or in that regard in any major liberal city?
I think that if you're a Republican in New York, you're obviously in the minority, but you're a lot tougher than a Republican who's in a red state, because we face the enemy every day. We have to know what we're talking about. We have to be able to discuss it. We have to go out there and be strong in the face of a very unfortunately angry and unhappy group of people, New York Democrats, who are quite, I would say, divisive in their rhetoric. Labeling Republicans as Nazis, which is atrocious that any American would label another American a fascist or a Nazi when we were the people who went out and defeated them together. I think that's very unfortunate. But I would say that it is a strong undertaking. It shows a strong character, a strong principled background, and I would say that it's a good thing to be a Republican in New York.
What do you think is the legacy of the Biden-Harris administration after 4 years?
I would say that the legacy is an open border with over 8 million people crossing into our country. We don't know who they are. They let them pass. In this country, you had to show papers to prove that you had had your COVID vaccine in order to sit down in a restaurant. They opened our border and let people pass through who we have no idea who they are, what country of origin they're from, what background they have, if they are from jail, if these countries in South America are just letting their prisoners out, we don't know. People are coming from Haiti. That means that they're taking a plane into Latin America to come up. People are coming from China, all these different countries in order to get into the United States. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they mean. We don't know what they're up to. And yet they're crawling around our country and literally responsible for much of the crime and much of the problems here in New York City, too. As our mayor, Eric Adams, said, who's a Democrat, New York can't handle this influx of migrants. I would also say that Joe Biden has created a horrible legacy for foreign policy. Ukraine proves that. The Israeli-Gaza conflict proves that. The who knows what's going to happen in Taiwan proves that. The gain of the Chinese throughout Africa has proven that. He has not been up to the task of creating a strong precedent for the United States being out there and helping to create world order.
Could you develop what you think about Joe Biden's foreign policy?
Yes. So when he literally allowed both parties were resolved to leave Afghanistan, but he did so in a way that basically was a disaster. We literally put everything in our planes and left. We left behind people who had helped us and supported us for years in Afghanistan. Those people most likely slaughtered by the government that took over. I believe that because it was such a disaster, he showed such weakness in the Afghan evacuation that opened the door to the Ukrainian invasion. Vladimir Putin knew that Joseph Biden was a paper tiger. He was not going to stand up for the United States, so why would he stand up for Ukraine?
What do you think is his legacy in terms of industry, job creation?
Well, just last month, we lost 46,000 jobs in manufacturing. Only 12,000 jobs were created in the entire United States. That's for 350 million people. I would say that when you look around cities like Detroit, which used to be dynamic cities of industry that created cars that were bought the world over, when you see that these cities are turning into rust bins, like even New York City, our industry is tanked. I would say that it's not a very good standard. And as you can see now, Kamala is not running on it. She's talking about basically being a change agent. She was part of those 4 years. She was, according to her, the last person in the room with Joe Biden. So she had a say in these policies. And obviously, she doesn't agree with them, but she helped shape them.
What do you think former President Trump would change for the American industry and job market?
Well, he's talking about a whole overhaul. I think that he's talking about tariffs, bringing tariffs in. So if a country has a 100% tariff against goods that the United States is exporting, they would have a reciprocation where their goods coming into the United States would face such a tariff. He is the sort who is a successful businessman with his real estate in New York. He also doesn't get enough credit for the fact that he worked with both sides of the aisle when he was a businessman in New York, and he did his utmost to do so in Washington as well. I just don't think he understood that the swamp was so entrenched that people were not going to come together to do what was best for the people of the United States because they wanted to score political points. So I think that is one of the major things. But I do think that he will bring that bipartisan idea of how to fix the economy, move it forward, unleash the economy, having people like Elon Musk to revolutionize standards and cut waste in government. These are the things that will get our economy moving and end inflation.
What do you think will happen if Kamala Harris wins?
Well, God forbid. If she were to win, I think it's a continuation of decline. I think it's a continuation of the Joe Biden era. I don't think that she has an original thought or idea. She keeps talking about how she's from the middle class, even though she seems to have grown up in Canada in a wealthy part of Montreal. She became a United States senator. These are not things that the middle class in the United States truly link to. I believe that she would just be a continuation of his disastrous years. And quite frankly, remember, Joe Biden was not exactly putting forward his own ideas. He was just a puppet for the people behind him in the Democrat Party who were able to unleash their ideas that they wanted to put forward. And she'll be much of the same.
Can you say anything nice about her?
She seems to have a joy for laughter.
Recently, President Biden said that Trump supporters were garbage. Before Kamala Harris said that it was a mistake, she basically backtracked. What can you say about Harris supporter? What do you think about them?
Well, I think it was unfortunate. I'd like to address that first. In the United States, you know, in Britain, I know they say that they have Labour prime ministers and they have conservative prime ministers. In the United States, once you become president, you're not a Republican president or a Democrat president. You're the president of the entire United States and all its people, including the people who did not vote for you. The strongest part of a federal republic is the fact that you're elected by the majority, but you protect the minority's rights. And I think it was disastrous. I think it was a show of his, unfortunately, decline mentally, that he was willing to say something so disgusting and disparaging about the supporters of his opponents. I don't think any people in the United States are garbage, including his supporters or Kamala Harris's. They're people who have an honest idea of what they believe is best for the United States. I stand in opposition to that. I don't believe that their opinion is the correct one for our government and our country. And I think that you would not see Donald Trump make such a mistake. In any event, I think he would probably turn around and be putting his hand out, as he did with the supporters of RFK when he dropped out of the race, to bring them into the fold. I think it's very sad that that Joe Biden was willing to say such a thing. And then you saw with Mark Cuban, which is one of the principal supporters and surrogates for Kamala Harris, he disparaged women who are supporting Donald Trump, and that is just very sad and unfortunate for him, very revealing of his character.
Earlier, we talked about immigration. It is also a hot topic in France. In France, there is a cultural component to the topic of immigration. Is it also something in the United States, or is the problem mainly that you have people with no background and economically it can be a burden? Or is there also a cultural problem?
For clarification, when you say cultural, do you mean the French character, the French culture, that they can't be assimilated?
In France, some people come in France and do reject
the French
culture,
okay.
Indeed.
So the United States has always been a country that's welcome to immigrants, law-abiding immigrants, immigrants who come through the front door, immigrants who will come assimilate. We are famous for calling ourselves the great melting pot. Many cultures come and they assimilate into ours and become part of the great American family. I believe that if you don't know where these people are coming from, you're creating a permanent underclass of people who will never be able to work their way up through the ladder and the ladder in the United States has always been education. These people have to learn how to speak English. They have to learn our rules and understand our Constitution, believe in a law-abiding society. And I think if you're not willing to do that, if you're just here for $1, you're not going to advance, you're not going to do well for yourself, and you're always going to be in the shadows of our society. Now, if that's something similar that's going on in France, then yes, that is something that the United States and France share.
What do you think is the best way forward for the United States? How can you heal the divide that we see today between Republicans and Democrats?
Well, it's a two-party system, so it's going to aggravate a divide. You're always going to have one or the other in that sort of system. But I don't think that it's entirely a bad thing for people to be divided in the sense of a political opinion. I think it's sad that the states have basically been put into the pockets of red state versus blue state, because I think that that's just not really how it is in the United States. But I think that 4 years of someone like President Trump, who will not be able to run again, could be incredibly healing in the sense that he has 4 years, that's all. He can go in do his job. He can do things that another president who just comes into office would not do simply because they're thinking about running for re-election. And I think if he can reach out to people like he's doing right now to try to take down the blue wall, which is Michigan, Wisconsin, and states like that, and bring them back into his corner as he did in 2016, he'll have converted people who are blue to red. And if he can do that, he can do that in other states and put out a hand to the opposition and invite them into the fold to help with our country. I think one of the reasons that, or one of the sad things about MAGA in 2016 was that it was co-opted by the RNC, the Republican National Committee. This country is not going to be able to heal itself, make itself great again, unless you have people from both sides of the aisle, conservative Democrats, Republicans, libertarians, and such, who are willing to come together, hopefully in his cabinet, and do what's best and do what's right, not what's politically expedient, but do what this country needs to heal itself, move forward, heal our economy, our people, and in so doing, help push back the forces of tyranny in the world. I think a strong Donald Trump means a weak Vladimir Putin.
Why do you think the people, especially Republicans, chose Trump over other candidates? Is it because of his foreign policies? Is it because of his domestic policies, his stance on immigration, or maybe his ability, his supposed at least ability to create jobs? Why do you think appealed to the people?
In 2016, and I would say since then too, his appeal has mainly been on domestic affairs. Building the wall, ending nonstop immigration, putting a stop to the uniparty system in Washington, D.C., where they're scratching each other's backs rather than doing what's right for the American people. People go in to Congress poor and they come out wealthy. How is that possible? I think his appeal has always been basically on the domestic front. It's all about making America great again. But I do think that he is the sort who, it's not spoken about enough, but he is a New York Republican, and that's quite different than other sorts of Republicans. It's not Floridian, it's not the Midwest. He's plain spoken. He will say, even if it gets him in trouble, he will say what he honestly believes. He's not crafting his words for a political audience. He's not afraid to say what he believes is the truth. And that is quite appealing to people. And I'm sure even in France, you must have politicians who are plain spoken and they win people to their side by saying the honest truth that they believe.
I was asking this question because, Trump, he was, there were assassinations attempts against him. And what I wanted to know is, how can he appeal to the whole American people when we see that some people have been radicalized enough so that they now try to shoot him?
Right. Well, remember, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated too. William McKinley as well. I would say that we don't have enough answers about the first man who in Pennsylvania tried to assassinate him. I think the country is still owed an inquiry into what really happened, who he was, where his background was, why he came to do what he did. I don't think that people who try to assassinate represent the vast majority of the people who oppose him. And I think that it was tremendously saddening, very scary that day. He could have been killed. He had not picked his vice president. It would have thrown everything into a horrible state of affairs in the United States. A man who so many people support and love and place their hopes in, to see what could have happened to him. Thank God only his ear was pierced. The bullet still hit him. This is a terrible thing, but we pray for him until Election Day and beyond, because there will be people who will try to stop him going forward. When he wins next Tuesday, the threat to his life does not end, as it was proven with Ronald Reagan.
So I have a few questions about the upcoming election. I read recently a poll, I believe it was Gallup, that said that only 37% of Americans had faith in the election process. In 2020, there were a lot of talks about election frauds.
Right.
Do you think election frauds might happen this year? And how do you think the people would react if they think that it happened?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think that people will be much more willing to go forward and maybe bring lawsuits themselves against certain areas and election boards in their states and their counties. I think that the RNC, the Republican National Committee, has done a great job of hiring lawyers, of spending the last 4 years trying to pass laws in states to verify and make sure that it's a fair, free, and legal vote. But this is the great test, and we're going to see how it turns out. 62 million people in the United States have already voted. This is prior to Election Day. That's quite a lot of people. Hopefully that takes some of the burden off of Tuesday's vote itself when people go into the lines, but the votes will still have to be counted. And each state has its own system, and that brings its own problems as well. I believe at the end of the day, all the votes should be counted by hand.
In France, it is quite shocking for a lot of us that in the US, there are some states where it is not necessary to bring your ID and an ID with a photography of yourself when you go and vote. To us, it is mandatory. When you vote in France, you need to bring your ID, and there needs to be a picture. Why do you think it's still the case in the greatest democracy in the world that you can vote with no ID?
That's a very good question. In the United States, I don't know of a state where you have to prove by photo ID that you have to vote, that you are who you say you are. Most of the time here in New York, you're proven by your former signature from the last vote. That's what's matched. This is an inadequate system. I believe that there are ways that we could fix that. And primary amongst them would be the Democrats getting on board with allowing to work with us to have photo IDs. I'm sure that there's a system we could come up with where they are free for all citizens over the age of 18, a voter ID, that would be free. I'm sure there's some way to handle it, but the Democrats have to get on board, because unless they do, in states like New York, where they are the overwhelming majority of the state government, it's not going to happen, because this is up to the state governments rather than to the federal.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Democrats' rhetoric is that such laws would be discriminatory to certain groups of people. So do you think they really believe that, or they have ulterior motives?
No, I don't believe they believe that. I think they have ulterior motives. In order to get into the houses of Congress, you have to show a photo ID. That means to go visit your Democrat congressperson and speak to them, seek redress from them. You have to show your ID to get into their building. So if they believe that you should have to show ID to get into their building to see them, I don't understand why they wouldn't think that their constituents would also have that ID to show on voting day.
Final question. In France, again, former President Trump has a very bad reputation. Most French people do not like him. Maybe or maybe not, it is because they don't know him. Do you think Mr. Trump is a friend to the French people? And what do you want to say to the French audience about Mr. Trump and his relationship with us?
I would say that, especially when it comes to NATO, I think there's a misunderstanding that he's not trying to get rid of NATO or disband it or for the United States to leave it. He's looking for member states of the NATO alliance to live up to their financial obligations in order to help protect the Atlantic Alliance itself. All members need to have ready militaries that are capable of defending their own borders as well as all of ours. An attack on one is an attack on all, and that's something that's very sacred, even in the United States. And I don't think that Europeans always understand how important NATO is to the American people as well, and to the Canadian people are here in North America. I would say that it's unfortunate that perhaps he does not have the best reputation in France. I think he seeks the same things, though, that the French people do: liberty, fraternity, protection for our people, a great economy, and to see us all succeed. I don't think he sees the United States succeeding as France or another country doing poorly. That's not his agenda. I hope in his next term he's able to have a better relationship with the people of France and Europe as well, and Great Britain. But I don't think that that is something that he is going to focus on, in the sense that being popular has never been something that is in his interest. He sets out to do his job and to do it correctly. He stands up for the American interests, And that might step on some people's toes, but that's the job that he'll have been elected by the American people to do, just as the job of the French president is to stand up for the French people. So I hope in the next 4 years, there's improved relations between the United States and France, but we are two countries that stand together, have stood together, and will continue to stand together. And I think we're great friends. And no occupant of the White House or the Élysée Palace will change the natural kinship between our two peoples.
I actually thought of another question. Do you think Mr. Trump, if he's elected, would have better relationship between the heads of states of the European countries or with the European Commission? What would be the difference between his relationship with head of states and the Union?
He would be seeking to have a better relationship with the members of the independent European nations. So with the Chancellor of Germany, the French president, the Danish prime minister. People forget how important Denmark is to the United States because of Greenland, which just sits off of our coast, or I should say the coast of Canada. But he will seek to have a better relationship, not with some bureaucratic wannabe nation state, but with the elected leaders of each independent sovereign state.
Mr. Walsh, thank you for having us today in the Metropolitan Republican Club. And I hope that nothing extraordinary will happen in the coming months and that the relationship between our two people will continue for a long time.
Thank you so much, and for today.